Hello, and welcome to episode 28 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. And tonight's episode, I'm Patrick Stemp, and with me are Michael Ronn and Jamie Maltman. How you guys doing?
Great. How are you doing, Patrick?
Good. Tonight we're going to be talking about our top reads of 2014 as we are a couple weeks away from closing out the year. But first of all, as always, we're going to talk about our reading for the week. And who wants to go first? One of you guys always goes first. Why don't I go first this week?
Oh, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's change it up.
Sure, why not? So I've been reading Myra Grant's Symbiont, and I actually set that aside this week because I was just felt like reading something else. So I actually picked up from a BookBub ad, The Uncanny Valley: Tales from a Lost Town by Gregory Miller, which I'd never heard of, but it came in my BookBub email, and it was free. And for some reason, it's one of those things, maybe the universe was telling me to read this book or something, I don't know, because for some reason I had The Uncanny Valley stuck in my head. I think because maybe they were talking about it on another podcast that I listened to. I think maybe Self-Publishing Answers. And so I just had it in my head, and then this BookBub came through, and it looked interesting, and it was free, and I sent it to you guys, and I know, Michael, you were noticing that it was, I guess, an author who Ray Bradbury, there was like a little blurb with the book that Ray Bradbury likes or something, yeah.
Yeah, that was another book. I think
it was in there, too.
It was this one,
Oh,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah, I was thinking of another book that we kept talking about that had that in there too, but yeah, this was you're right.
So I picked that up and read through it, and what it is I loved it. I just finished it tonight. So it's a series of short stories, and I think they were actually short stories that were published in a bunch of different places, and he pulled them together into this kind of collection, and he frames it in. There's a radio station that held kind of not a contest necessarily, but they asked people to kind of send in letters about their town. Kind of small town memories sort of thing. So each of these short stories is one of these letters that was sent to the radio station about this town called Uncanny Valley. And it's extremely creepy, dark. The stories are pretty short. There's quite a few of them. If you like horror, mystery, supernatural kind of stuff, it's a fun read. It's really interesting, and then I won't ruin the ending, but it all kind of ties together at the end of the book in a really interesting way. So I definitely recommend it. It's a good read. And then I started reading The Lucid Season 1 by Kevin Tumlinson and Nick Thacker, and I think I'm still on the first episode of that. But so far it's good. So I'll come back to that one probably next week. And that was my reading.
Awesome. I'll go next.
Sure.
I got a lot of graphic novels this past week that I've been reading. I'm continuing the Bone series by Jeff Smith. I am now on Volume 4, but I'm waiting on that to get to the library. So in the meantime, I picked up another series that I just happened to see, and that is this here. Can you guys see it?
Oh. Yeah, I got a couple of those for one of my kids a couple years ago for Christmas. It's cool.
Yeah, Mouse Guard. At first I was like, I'm not sure what to expect. This just looks interesting because it's kind of a square cover and all the other graphic novels were rectangles. But I started reading it and was hooked. Absolutely fantastic. There's two at my local library right now, and it's about these mice, and it's almost like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, but with mice, and it's these mice, they're guards and knights, and they're having to defend for themselves against all the evils of the world, owls, crabs, all these weasels that are trying to get them, and it's really cool, and it tells a really interesting story between these four mice, and just the colors and the illustrations and the story, it's all fantastic. I just really, really enjoyed it, and didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I did.
Did you ever read the Redwall series?
No, I haven't.
Or see the cartoon on TV?
No, I didn't, but everyone talks about this in relation to that, so I'm going to have to read that next.
I think that's Brian Jacques is the author, if I'm not mistaken. And I think, there's got to be like 20 books in that series, I think.
That's what I've heard.
That's one I think that I've been wanting to. I read that I think the first couple years ago, but that's one I've been wanting to reread. But unfortunately, it's one of those series where you go to chapters and they'll have books 3 through 20. You think they got book 1 and 2? No, like.
No, of course, every library is the same. They're checked out or destroyed or something like that. Permanently lost. So, yeah, Mouse Guard. I'm reading that, and then I'm also reading a James Bond novel, kind of a 180 for me, Moonraker. Have you guys ever read that?
Cool. I've read a bunch of the James Bond books years ago, but I can't remember if I've read that one.
Okay, yeah, it's kind of the next novel I'm writing is kind of a spy, sci-fi kind of book, so I wanted to read something that was kind of iconic for the genre, and so I looked up on a bunch of different websites, and they said that Moonraker is considered by many to be one of the better James Bond novels. So I started it, and it's not blowing me away. I mean, the first half of the book, he's just playing cards, with this guy, and it's just like, come on, man. Seriously, I mean, it must literally be like 50 pages of him playing cards and how he's outwitting this villain. My patience is wearing kind of thin on it, but in the writing style, it's really not that easy to comprehend, I think. I have a hard time following it sometimes, just because I don't know if it's a British thing or if it's just his writing style, but it seems like it's kind of convoluted. But so far, it's not bad. I'll definitely continue and stick it out and finish it. So I'll let you guys know what I thought next week. So that's my week in reading.
Cool. Jamie?
Jamie?
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I had, based on what you guys have been saying, I'd requested Bone, the first volume there, so that arrived at the library. I just picked it up just before the show tonight, so I haven't started on it yet, but and actually picked up the very first Sandman as well. So that's another one I'll be checking out imminently. But what I didn't get from the library, because I dropped it off last week, which then led to a really interesting story, was the one I'd been reading before, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. And after I think because I mentioned it, that I took it back to the library last week on the show. It was Roland Denzel, one of the listeners, watchers of the show, mentioned that was actually the way he released that was very similar to Fiction Unboxed that we always talk about, where back in 2007, 2008, he'd already got the contract with Tor to produce this book, this fantasy novel, but he made the deal with them that he was able to release the chapters on his website as he went along, and then release the first round of edits, and release the second round of edits, and various stages along the way. So I was reading the hardcover from the library before, and then I switched to the downloadable, I think it was the just pre-final copy edit version that I was reading from his website on my Kindle for the rest of the week. So finished that off, really enjoyed it, really loved the story, the characters were really interesting. There's two sisters that have got to deal with this situation, like one's being married off to this king in this rival kingdom as sort of a pawn in an uneasy truce/treaty that's going on there, and then there's the other sisters trying to sort of get her out of that, and then there's this killer, and then there's this god, because they have these gods that have to be given willingly. People have to donate their breath, their one breath of magic that they have to them in order to sustain these gods. And so there's all these gods, there's all these different things, and it's just really interesting story, lots of great twists. I didn't like it as much as the previous Brandon Sanderson book that I read. The reason why, and it's funny, it's something where when I was younger I might have liked it a lot because of this, but it seemed very much like a role-playing game kind of magic system, where it was very rules-based, specific details. He's even got this thing at the back of like, okay, if you have 50 breaths that have come into you from different people, you're at this level with these abilities, and if you're at 100, you're at this level. So I'm like, wow, I would have loved that when I was 13, but now I like it to be a little more, the term I've heard some people talk about is like numinous magic, where it's like a little bit more just, wow, stuff happens and you maybe understand parts of it, and there might be some analysis to it, but it was just a little bit too detailed and a little bit too sort of regimented the way that it was rolled out. Even though he does a good job weaving it in with the story and the explanations for it, like it's all great, but I found that a little bit too almost heavy-handed in the way that came together. But he's, different authors, especially fantasy authors, have their things that they're very excited about, like Tolkien with Tolkien with languages and maps and history and different things. But Brandon Sanderson loves his magic systems and the details of that, and so this is a good example of that. But it was really neat too, because after I read it, it did have, like, between version 5 and version 4. So as an author, like putting on the author hat, these are the changes that I made based on recommendations from my editor, or based on recommendations from Tor, or based on this from my beta readers were saying I needed a bit more of that, so I sprinkled more of that in. And from version 5 to version 4, it was this, and version 4 to version 3. So it was just that sort of change history there was a really neat thing. And again, he was doing that, his way, kind of controversially at the time too, because that was early ebook adoption too that he was doing that. But really neat project, and overall really enjoyed the book. And then since I just finished that last night, I got back to read a few more parts of the episodes of Yesterday's Gone season 2. So, which I may now put aside a little bit while I hit some of these graphic novels, but that's my week in reading.
Cool. So, and the Sandman that you got, is that is that a graphic novel, or is that like the first comic? Is the first 5?
It is. It shows up as number 1, which is like preludes and somethings.
Nocturnes.
Nocturnes. Yeah. Okay, that's right. Yep. So, is that the right way that I should be reading it? Like that's where I should be starting from, or?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, I remember that. It's been like 20
right.
years probably.
Yeah, I think it's 95. Right. It shows up, right? Something like that, or is it even earlier? I don't know. Maybe there's just this edition was 95. Anyway, I'm excited because
it starts off wonderful. I mean, I remember that first issue. That was great.
Yeah, that series blew my mind the first time I read it. So, and that's Neil Gaiman for anybody who doesn't know.
Yes, Sandman.
So, should we move on to our topic?
Yes.
Good.
So I think we're gonna kind of do like several roundtables here, and so we each picked our 5 top fiction reads of the year, and we decided to limit ourselves to 1 nonfiction each. So we'll go from 5 to 1, go around the circle a few times, and then go on to our nonfiction. And if we have some time, then maybe we can, if we want to, we can talk about a few of the books that maybe were on our list but didn't make it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So do we want to go Jamie, Michael, me? Just because that's the order you're on my screen. And
Sure.
So Jamie, what's your 5th favorite read of the year?
I think this is the hardest part. Is it's almost like a tie between several. I'm like going back and forth even as I talk. I guess, okay, I'll say the 5th, I'll give, the one, I think was the first one I mentioned when I first came on the show, was Gateways by Brian Guthiel. It was the one that was the it was the fantasy set in a world like World War I. Right. And so it was about there was all the diplomatic side of it. It wasn't so much a war story as it was all the diplomacy and all the trade-offs. What the war was happening, and there was different. They have mentions of the campaigns, and then there was sort of resistance fighters, and there was a religious element of what was going on, and there were separatist things happening, and then there was this magic and the way that fit into it. So it's really neat. It's a debut book by an author that I haven't met, but I connected, read about his stuff through Goodreads and said, hey, that sounds like the kind of thing I'd like to read, and I got to read an art copy of that, and he released it back in, I think it was November, but really, really enjoyed that. And so that was, I'll put that down as my number 5 for the year, the historical fantasy category that I like so much.
Cool. Michael, what's your number 5?
Number 5 is a book I read early in the year that won me over. He very quickly became one of my favorite authors of all time, and that is the Fairy Tales of Hans Christian Andersen. And for those of you who don't know, he's the guy that wrote The Little Mermaid and a lot of other Disney movies that have become animated classics, but he wrote back in the 1800s. I believe he's Danish, or was a Danish author, and just a fantastic writer. Like, his writing style is just so sumptuous. Like, when you look at authors in the 1800s, you can say that their writing style was kind of stodgy and real stuffy and hard to follow and really long sentences, but his are very poetic. And in particular, there was one story that just made me a lifelong fan, and that was The Bottleneck. And it's about this wine bottle that this family, they're at a picnic enjoying it, and they leave the bottle behind, and he just longs to be back with them. And he tries to find them and goes through all these trials and tribulations and passes through all these different hands and gets broken. And it's just a really, really wonderful story. And I love fairy tales anyway, but these are definitely probably my favorite fairy tales of all time.
Cool.
That's my number 5.
So my number 5 was Edge of Tomorrow by Hiroshi Sakurazaka, and so this was the Alien Invasion meets Groundhog Day, where the main character is sort of trapped in this endless loop of fighting the same battle every day and getting killed and going back and trying to learn from his mistakes and slowly getting better at fighting the aliens. And the reason why this is happening to him is pretty cool. And I enjoyed the book. You know, it really kind of stuck with me. It's just straight up science fiction, alien invasion fun, and I would definitely recommend it over the movie. The movie wasn't bad, but in typical Hollywood fashion, they kind of screwed around with the ending, and I enjoyed the ending in the book a lot more. So that was mine. So on to number 4, Jamie.
We need like the bumper sound that they have on the Selmar Book Show.
Yeah.
Number 4.
Yeah. Just get Jem on here; he can do it.
Yeah.
All right, so I'll put down as my number 4 one that we have talked about quite a number of times, which was the Sawyer Jackson and the Long Land, which I just remember when I read it. That was the first book in the Sawyer Jackson series, and some of us have read it, or maybe all of us have read the second book by now, which is The Shadow Strait, but by Kevin Tumlinson. When I read it, I liked it right from the get-go. It grabbed me. I liked the sort of slightly eerie, creepy stuff that was going on. I liked the humorous aspects. I liked the multiverse and the way that the magic with the knot work was working, and the way that it was almost pseudoscientific, so it didn't feel like it was pure fantasy. It felt like, trying to make, more explain how this all works. But in a still sort of, I guess, numinous enough way that you don't really understand everything. It wasn't so detailed like I was saying there with Warbreakers. So.
Well, that's interesting too. I don't think we talked about that in that story, where that was interesting, where there's the magic side of it, but one of the characters in the book has figured out how to access that magic through technology. Yeah. He's a tinkerer, and he's got different devices that allow him to kind of do some of the same things, but not really. That was interesting.
And he's always rationalizing it in the scientific way.
Right.
As well, so which is leading to some fun banter as well. So just all around, really enjoyed the book. So that's my number 4.
Good.
Awesome. My number 4 would be Flora and Ulysses by Kate DiCamillo. And you guys probably haven't read that, but I found it on Goodreads. It was a recommendation for me, and I guess it's like I wouldn't call it middle grade fiction, but I wouldn't call it YA either. It's like in that weird space between those. Mm-hmm. But it's basically about this little girl who finds this squirrel outside of her home and thinks that it can talk. And they go on these crazy adventures. And the book is really like a commentary on the little girl's life because her parents are divorced. And in many ways, the squirrel is kind of helping her cope through that. And they have these crazy misadventures and all these weird things happen. And it's definitely very literary, but there's also illustrations with it that are just make it hilariously fun, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. And she's also the author of Because of Winn-Dixie. She did that and a couple of other children's books that won the Newbery Medal. So definitely that's my traditionally published book on the list.
Okay, cool. When you're describing that, it made me. Do you guys remember the Value Tales when you were kids? Do you remember that series of books? It was this whole series. I think probably you got it off TV or something, but it was like the value of believing and the value of
white books. Okay, yeah.
I still have them, but so each one was like a different historical figure.
Johnny Appleseed.
And
totally.
And so, but in each of those stories about these historical figures' lives, it was like the value that they sort of represented or learned in life. But each one, they had like an imaginary animal typically that would follow them through their life and their story, and they were really cool. But that kind of reminded me of
That's
those
pretty
books.
Cool.
Thank you for reminding me of that and giving me a reference for where I might actually look that up.
I have a box of them in the basement. I'll have to show you sometime. So my number 4 was Guardians of the Shroud by Scott Richards. And so this is a book, I think we've all read that. You guys both have read that, right?
I haven't, but you guys both did, yeah.
So this is I would call it YA, but it's also fairly dark, and so the Shroud is this sort of curtain between our world and another world where these demonic creatures lurk, and the teenage protagonist gets thrown into this world, and it's, we've talked about Scott before. He's not afraid to take his characters and his story in kind of dark directions, and so I really enjoyed that story. And it's actually a trilogy, so that I've read all 3 books in that, but I sort of list Guardians of the Shroud as my book on this list because it's the first one in the series, and that's where someone would want to start, obviously, if they were going to read it. That's mine. Number 3.
Number 3. So that was the other Brandon Sanderson one that I read. It was The Emperor's Soul, which is a short one. That's the one that's set in sort of a pseudo-Chinese kind of place, which the 2 historical periods I'm a biggest sucker for would be Roman stuff and Chinese stuff, and not coincidentally, I've started writing in spaces that are similar to that. So, but this was one where there was basically the emperor had been attacked and had lost his memory completely, had basically lost his soul in a way. And so there was this, I can't remember what they call them, sealers or something, but there's this woman that they captured because she was actually she's a forger, that's what they call them. And so she could use these stamps to basically change the story of what was going on with some object. So like if there was a wall that was all cracked and ugly, she could put one of these stamps on it and it would change the story to say this was actually repaired and repainted and a tapestry put up here. And the more believable it is, the better it takes. So there's this really neat magic related to that. So what they wanted her to do was restamp the Emperor's soul so that it would give him back his memories and make him the person that he was. But of course there's different factions that want that to go slightly differently than maybe it actually was, or harken back to a different period. So she has to learn about him and do this stuff, all with a ticking time bomb of I think she's got 90 days, otherwise they're going to kill her. So it was a really neat story. The way the magic system and the world building and everything came together was just woven so elegantly through it, and it was just the cultural stuff was there and the interactions, and it was all really this lady's self-talk and then just talking to people that were coming to her while she was in prison trying to get this done. And ultimately she was trying to plot her way out as well. So really neat little book, quick read, but I loved it. I really enjoyed that book. So The Emperor's Soul by Brandon
Sounds cool.
Sanderson.
Awesome.
Number 3, Michael, you disappeared there for a second. But...
Yeah, I went to grab it off my bookshelf, actually.
Okay.
My number 3 is 100 Days in Deadland by Rachel Ox. It's a zombie horror book, and the best way I would describe it is that it is, I guess she describes it pretty well on the front cover, it's a journey through Dante's Inferno with a shambling twist. So that's basically what the book is. It's Dante's Inferno, but it takes place in Iowa in like 2013, 2014, or modern day. And basically, the hero, her name is Cash, and she is working in a corporate office one day when the zombie apocalypse hits. I mean, it's pretty familiar story, you know. And she teams up with this guy. His name is, oh gosh, I forget his name. Clutch. He's a trucker and survivalist, and he's kind of like the equivalent of Virgil. If you guys have read the Dante's Inferno, kind of teaches her how to survive and is her mentor in this zombie apocalypse world. And it's almost like a coming of age story about how she learns from being timid to learning how to defend herself, and all the different factions that rise up as a result of the zombies being around. And this is book 1 in the series, and I have not read books 2 and 3 yet, but I think book 3 comes out here pretty soon. But I would definitely recommend the series. It's a zombie book, and if you're tired of zombies, this is one that I would definitely read, because I'm pretty tired of zombies, but I enjoyed the hell out of this book. It was awesome.
Okay, cool. My number 3 is Sibylla Byrne by James S.A. Corey. It was the 4th book in the Expanse series that started with Leviathan, if anyone's looking to start a new series. Love these guys. So James S.A. Corey is actually 2 authors writing under that name, but I've thoroughly enjoyed all 4 books in the series, and this just kind of continues. It's horror, science fiction. I don't know that I'd call it alien invasion, but there is some element of that going on in the background. It's just, if you like space opera, it's a fantastic read. And so that was my number 3. Number 2, we're getting close.
All right. Well, this is one of the very first books that I read this year, and it was a good one, and that was American Gods by Neil Gaiman.
Cool.
Love that. It's funny, I'd actually read them out of order because they're not exactly the series, but I'd read Anansi Boys, I think, a few months before that, which comes subsequent and deals with sort of follow-on stuff on a tangent. It's not the direct successor to it, but basically it's all these gods that we have read about in all these different pantheons around the world throughout history can basically end up in different places based on where the believers go. So when people emigrated from all over the world to America, some aspect, like basically these gods would continue to exist, but because they have so many fewer believers, their lives are kind of run down and shabby in some cases. And it's this guy Shadow that was in prison at the beginning, and then he starts meeting these gods, and all this crazy stuff's happening, and it's eerie, it's just neat stuff, and lots of twists and turns. And Neil Gaiman, I am a huge fan now, and really, really enjoyed that book. So, American Gods, and I think did they make it into a show, or they're working on it? It's coming out before too long. I don't know. That would be pretty cool stuff.
Michael, what's your number 2?
Cool. My number 2 is the Bone series. And, we talked about it, and there's not much to say, I guess, other than it's about the book of 3 Bone cousins who get kicked out of their town in Boneville for reasons that are revealed throughout the series, and end up in this mysterious valley where things are not what they seem. And it's very much a hero tale. There's action, there's adventure, there's romance, there's
cow races.
Humor. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's the story. It just gets deeper and deeper with every volume. I've read the first 3 volumes, and I'm just in love with it. I can't wait to finish it so I can buy the hardcover with the color version. Definitely going to be a book that I put on my shelf.
Awesome. So my number 2 is Sawyer Jackson and the Long Land by Kevin Tumlinson. So we're going to come back to that one. And so for sort of the same reasons that Jamie mentioned. I mean, it was a story that kind of grabbed me right away. I loved the idea behind the world with the not work and being able to change. Kind of, Jamie, almost like you were talking about with the stamps, right? I mean, you can kind of rework reality, and the characters in the book are a lot of fun. The main character, Sawyer Jackson, and his grandparents. Some of the other characters that come in. 8 Ball, if you read the series, you'll like. 8 Ball's really cool, and so it was a lot of fun. And the second book is also very good. That picks up where the first book left off, and so this is a series that I think we're all waiting anxiously for the next one. And that's my number 2. So we're down to the number 1s here.
Number 1.
Well, I think mine shouldn't be too much of a surprise after hearing me rave about it, but The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is the first book of the Kingkiller Chronicle, I think the name of it is. And I absolutely love that book. It's a big, thick, epic fantasy book that's not all about. It's not about millions of viewpoints. It's not about millions of, there's a fair cast of characters, but it's not like all these different dynasties and wars and different things. It's a storyteller. It's a tale of a storyteller, and it's just so neat how there's many stories nested inside of stories. Because basically there's a little bit of narration of what's going on at the beginning, but then this one guy, the chronicler, is now interviewing the main character, Kvothe, about his life, because he was this big star sort of wizard / warrior / outlaw / he came from like a gypsy trooper background, and he's got a million different abilities, and it's basically him telling his life story over the course of 3 days, and this was the first day of storytelling. So he would be telling a story, but then he would be telling the story of someone coming along and telling a story, and then another different person telling a legend, and then his time in university learning about magic, and I just loved it so much. It's really fantastic language. It gets sort of poetic at times, but it's got a really nice flow, but the characters are really well explored, and there's some romantic angles to it, and there's the learning magic angles to it, and there's some coming of age-ish stuff because of this is sort of from the time that bad stuff starts happening in his life through learning all the about his magical ability and then exploring it and that sort of thing, but weaving in all the history and the cultures and these different things that are happening in that world as well. So it's honestly one of my favorite books I've ever read, and I'm very excited to read the next book, which is The Wise Man's Fear, or A Wise Man's Fear. And then there's the sort of book 2.5 that just came out recently, which is The Slow Regard of Silent Things. But I think I might wait until closer to him actually getting the third book out and then revisit and sort of blur through all of them all at once. But absolutely love it. And it's, introduced me to his blog and some of the stuff he's doing. And I just, he's just a really, really neat guy. And I mentioned before, I love what they're doing. If you Google his World Builders site and check out what he's doing charitably, because it's amazing. I think they're over $750,000 they raised in their drive this year for Heifer International, and there's some neat things that came out of that, like Neil Gaiman reading Jabberwocky on video was one of the stretch goals for that, because they have a lot of authors from all over the science fiction and fantasy world, authors and game makers and stuff contributing to that. So really, really cool stuff. So
cool.
There's my number one.
Okay.
All right, my number one is Mouse Guard series. I just finished it today, but it really just rocked my world. I mean, I just was not prepared for this to be as good as it was. There's just nothing that I didn't like about it. And it's actually still ongoing, so I'll be curious to see how the series continues. But the first 2 volumes that I read were just awesome. I mean, if you're into the anthropomorphic stories, where you've got animals talking, and they're wielding swords and capes and all that, that's my sort of thing. I love those sorts of novels. I'm always a sucker for a good anthropomorphic or character. So, yeah, that's my number one, and I'd probably say it's probably one of the best graphic novels I've ever read in terms of story, character, world, color. I mean, all of it just came together in one cohesive, excellent package.
Good.
A big star on that one.
Yeah.
And you guys will never guess what my number one.
Oh no.
The Venusian?
Yeah. So obviously, for anyone who's listened to us in the past, probably you'll already know my number one pick is The Martian by Andy Weir. So we've talked about that a few times, for reasons, because it was one of the Goodreads picks of the year as well. And I just loved this book. I loved everything about it. Science fiction, obviously, so right up my alley. A little bit on the hard side, but not to the point that it got so science-y that, because I don't have that kind of brain, but just that the main character stranded on Mars, no hope, but he still has a sense of humor about the situation that he's in, and he just perseveres and doing everything that he can. So he's through an accident that happens at the beginning of the book, he's left, but everybody else kind of takes off and leaves. There's a sandstorm that causes things to go wrong. So they, thinking that he has died, take off and leave him there. They strand him on Mars. And he has no way of telling them on their way back to Earth, or NASA back on Earth, that he's isn't dead. So he has to figure that out, so that hopefully they can put together a team to maybe come back and get him back to Earth. And it's just a great story, a lot of fun, fantastic read. And as we've said before too, I'm anxiously awaiting that movie, but I won't go see it until I see the reviewer that I trust. There's this kind of one guy who reviews movies that we have sort of the same taste. That's Movie Bob on The Escapist, if you're wondering. If he likes it, I know I will. So it's always a shame to take a book that you love and then go to the theater and it's terrible. But
yeah,
it's got a pretty good pedigree. I mean, it's who was it? Matt Damon, I think, is going to play the lead, and if I remember correctly, I think it's Ridley Scott that's making it into a movie, or at least his studio or whatever, he's attached to it somehow, I think. So
Good start.
yeah, it's definitely a good start. So
I know Hugh Howey probably is pissed. It's like, oh man, why can't they make wool?
They will, I'm sure.
Eventually, one day.
I don't know if you saw that, for speaking of Hugh and Wool the other day,
Stephen King,
yeah, mentioned that he liked the first part of Wool when he read it, so it looks forward to reading more.
I liked Hugh Howey's comment where because Stephen King said, I like it. He said, I'm going to put that on the cover from now on, bigger than my name and bigger than the title. It's just Stephen King, I like it.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's like the best blurb ever.
Yeah.
Along with the 700 other books he blurbs every year, but yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, who cares?
So that was our our fiction list, and we decided to limit ourselves to one nonfiction each because otherwise this could go on all night. So, Jamie, what was your number one nonfiction read of the year?
It's the one that I've mentioned a few times that I physically love this book. I just think it's such the coolest thing. It was my Christmas present that I asked for my mom last year, which is Wonder Book: The Illustrated Guide to Creating Imaginative Fiction by Jeff Vandermeer. And he's had some books like his, what is it, Annihilation. This year was, and some of the book clubs that I saw, and it was mentioned, it was on some of the finalist ones for whatever category. Is that sci-fi or was it horror? I'm not actually 100% sure, but this book it's a book about the craft of writing, but for genre writers, and it's not just the book itself. It's for anyone who's watching, it's like the pictures. He has so much neat artwork, and all these the sidebars are cool. These little characters that help to explain stuff to you, and he's got essays from like who are all the people in here? So like George R. R. Martin and Lev Grossman and Neil Gaiman and Ursula K. Le Guin and Joe Abercrombie, David Anthony Durham. Like there's either they wrote like an afterword, or they wrote a sidebar, or they wrote an essay. It's just fantastic, and it's got some of the coolest activities like for like writing exercises and just ideas for doing different things at all stages of your writing, and even just sometimes the pictures and like are inspirational. Like there's sometimes when I'm writing, I'll flip through and I'll look at some of these idea joggers or just the way that they've put together different aspects of writing, and I think it's fantastic. It's such a neat, inspiring book with stuff all the time that you can see stuff like this one was talking about inspiration itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I just think it's the coolest thing. Like any writer that's writing in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, anything speculative at all, should check that out because I just think it's cool. And that was actually I gotta give the hat tip to Chuck Wendig for really recommending it strongly last December, and that's why I ended up getting it. So thank you, Chuck, for that.
Good stuff. Michael, what was yours?
Mine was How to Be a Free-Range Human by Mary Ann Cantwell. Probably not a surprise. One of my favorite books I read this year. Just excellent. Just a book about taking control of your life and doing what you do best and pursuing the creative passions in your life to make money and find enjoyment and do all the things that you want to do. And I've read a lot of those self-help books, and a lot of them are underwhelming. It's like, okay, how many more times am I going to read that happiness is a mindset? But she actually really breaks it down and systematically shows you how you can do the same thing for yourself. All the things that she's done, and it just was an awesome book. I listened to the audiobook as well. I ended up reading the book twice, listening to the audiobook twice. I'm probably going to read it again sometime next year, but it was really fun. Best book of the year for me.
Good. And my number one nonfiction was The Pursuit of Perfection and How It Harms Writers by Christine Catherine Rush.
Great choice.
Yeah, I really, I think that was one of those books where it was the things that we've been hearing. You hear it on the self-publishing podcast. You read it on people's blogs, and it was a book that just really kind of brought a lot of those ideas together for me, and just gave me kind of a better understanding of that, and came along at just the right time before we all started NaNoWriMo in November. It was part of a story bundle that was available for that, and just absolutely loved it. It was a tough pick. It was a tough pick, though. It was my number one, but there was a close second from her husband. So
yeah,
we love Dean and Christine.
Yeah, they're great. We'll have to get them on the show sometime.
So that's our list. Is there any sort of last minute books you want to throw out that almost made the list but not quite, or that you just can't help yourself but to mention? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in for that. I'm in for that for two. Actually, I had my reread of the year was The Magician's Nephew, by C.S. Lewis, the first Narnia book. Well, first by one version, last chronologically in terms of when he wrote them, I believe. or second last. But I read that to my son, and it's the first time I've read it in 30 years, and I really loved it, and it aged very well, and there were so many different neat angles to it, and things that I understand more now, and so I really love to see that. I was actually oh yeah, I think it was the Writing Excuses. They were talking about that, like books that age well and you can read differently at different ages and sort of last that way. One of their last few episodes, and yeah, I know I really enjoyed reading that again. And then my honorable mention, the one that I was like humming and hawing about which way to go for sort of fifth, sixth, was The Emperor's Edge, the first book of the Emperor's Edge series, which is called The Emperor's Edge by Lindsay Broker, which is like steampunk fantasy, and got this sort of mystery, got this cool, quirky, slightly OCD guardswoman main character, and a lot of funny banter with sort of a misfit band of people that she ends up working with to try and save the Emperor while they are branded outlaws. So it's kind of like saving him despite what's going on. And it was a really fun read. I really liked that a lot, and I have a lot of respect for Lindsay and what she's doing and helping a lot of indies out there as well. So definitely wanted to get her mentioned on there.
Okay. Anything from you, Michael? Last minute? Last chance?
Yeah, Kevin Tomlinson. I mean, the first book in this Sawyer Jackson book, I mean, that almost made the cut for me. I enjoyed it just as much as you guys. And then the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comics, the reboot that was done. I thoroughly enjoyed those until about halfway through when they changed the art, and it sucked. But other than that, it was awesome and totally an awesome use of the franchise. So,
I keep every time you said this, I keep meaning to mention it. I look down in the basement. I've got to go grab it. I have the 1989 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game. Role-playing game back in the day when you had to roll for your insanities and stuff like that, because it messes you up when you get mutated, and the Terror Bears are pretty messed up as well. And so yeah, but it's all all the artwork was done by, was it Eastman and Laird, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool stuff.
Okay, well, you guys throw out two, so I will. I guess I already kind of referred to this, but Killing the Top 10 Sacred Cows of Publishing by Dean Wesley Smith. That would have probably been second on my nonfiction list. And if I wanted to pull one out of my fiction list, I'd probably go with Pines by Blake Crouch. I really enjoyed that one as well. And can't wait for the TV show. We've talked about that before, too. That's coming in about 6 months, and I am very excited for that.
And I know I really enjoyed. I actually read the blog posts as Dean was publishing those. So rather than in book form,
right.
I've been following his blog for a while now, and so yeah, really enjoyed that. And it's funny, the Pursuit of Perfection. I think there's been a couple of different blog posts that Christine published on that topic. That was where it just really drove that home. I remember the first time I read that. So exactly the same reaction you had. So great choices all around there.
Yeah. Okay. So there might be some ideas there for anyone who's doing some Christmas shopping for readers on the show. And so we'll wrap it up. But next week we're going to be talking about the books that we've got on our wish lists for Christmas this year. So we'd love to hear from you, our viewers and our listeners. You can send us an email at tbrpodcast@gmail.com if you have a question or if you'd like to suggest a topic. If you're an avid reader and you'd like to come on the show for an episode, you can shoot us a note. We can talk about that as well. We typically record live Tuesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern, but we can change that up if we need to. You can also subscribe on YouTube or iTunes, and if you'd like to review, that would be fantastic. Be sure to visit our Goodreads page. The link to that should be in the show, and we'll see you next week. Have a good week, guys.
Happy reading, everyone.